My name is Evan Mitchell, and if you'd asked me 10 years ago whether I thought I'd ever hear my parents' voices again, I would have told you no, at least not without the bitterness that had been my inheritance. Even as I sit here, in the corner of my downtown Chicago apartment, the floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the late afternoon sun off the skyline, I can't shake the memory of my father's voice telling me I was a disappointment. I'm 34 now, though sometimes I feel older. Maybe that's what happens when you spend most of your life trying to prove something to people who never wanted to believe in you. My parents, Robert and Deborah Mitchell, were the kind of people who believed in sturdy professions: medicine, law, engineering. I chose to be a designer. I still remember the day I told them I'd accepted an internship at a branding agency instead of applying to graduate school. My mother's lips had twitched into something between a smirk and a wince. Branding? Like logos, she'd said, her voice thick with disbelief. My father had simply shaken his head, his eyes dull as he muttered, "You'll never make a living out of that. You'll never make anything." And maybe that's why, even now, the phone vibrating on my kitchen counter makes something old and raw tighten inside my chest. My first instinct is to ignore it. Nothing good has ever come of picking up when their number flashes across the screen. I pretend not to notice, leaning forward to open my laptop and scroll through the final drafts of a campaign my team has spent the last 6 months preparing for a major tech client. But the phone keeps vibrating 3 times for times. I close my eyes and count slowly. 1, 2, 3. I reach for the mug of cold coffee beside me, swallowing the sour taste. 5 missed calls. I don't answer. Instead, I get up and cross the living room, every step measured, deliberate. The hardwood floor creaks faintly under my socked feet. My apartment is nothing like the suburban house I grew up in, a place that always smelled faintly of lemon polish and disappointment. Here, the air is crisp clean. Modern furniture, steel fixtures, shelves lined with design books, and a handful of framed photos. Me standing beside my business partner, Leah Carter, at the agency's launch. Me accepting an award last year. Me alone, smiling in a way that still feels unnatural. My parents never came to that ceremony. They never called to say congratulations. And yet, here they are, suddenly calling me on a Wednesday afternoon like nothing ever happened. I rub my temples, feeling a familiar headache building behind my eyes. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe they're calling to tell me someone died, or to brag about my brother Ryan, who had dutifully become an orthopedic surgeon. Maybe they dialed by mistake. I try to convince myself of these things, but I can't shake the feeling that something is off. I pick up the phone, open the voicemail app, and press play. The first message crackles in the quiet. "Evan, it's your mother." My mother's voice says, strangely formal. "Call me back as soon as you can." No explanation. No warmth. The second message is the same, except this time my father speaks at the end. "Evan," he says, and there's something in the way he draws out the word that makes my stomach twist. "We really need to talk." My thumb hovers over the delete button, but I can't bring myself to press it. Instead, I set the phone down again, walk to the window, and stare out at the city sprawling below me. Chicago is loud and alive, filled with the rush of people who have places to go, people to become. For the first time in years, I feel like I've earned the right to be one of them. I built this life from nothing, piece by piece, without a single cent from my parents. I paid my own tuition, lived on instant ramen, and spent nights wondering if they were right, that I'd never make it. And now they want to talk. I force myself to focus on the view, the roofs glinting in the afternoon light, the taxis crawling along Michigan Avenue. But the unease won't go away. It's like a splinter under my skin. I turn back to the kitchen. My phone screen lights up again, this time with a text. From Mom. "Please call us, Evan. It's important." Important. They never said anything was important unless it was about them. I leave the message unread, shove my phone into the pocket of my jeans, and grab my laptop. Work is the only thing that makes sense. If I let myself think too much, the old bitterness will swallow me alive. The agency's project files are open, but my mind drifts. I see my father's face the last time we spoke in person 4 years ago, after I'd flown back for Thanksgiving. We'd barely made it through dinner before he'd started in on me. "You still doing that graphic thing?" he'd asked, carving into his turkey with unnecessary force. "Yes," I'd said evenly. "I run my own agency now." He'd snorted. "Well, that's cute."
Cute.
I shake the memory away, fingers tapping restlessly against a keyboard. My phone buzzes again. From Dad. "We're sorry to bother you, but it's urgent." I stand there, staring at the words until the letters blur. It shouldn't matter. I should ignore them the way they ignored me. But even after everything, some part of me is still that boy desperate for approval. My breath feels too shallow. I rub my chest, trying to will the ache away. My gaze drifts to a photo on the bookshelf, me at age 7, missing a front tooth, beaming as I held up a drawing of a superhero I'd made. My mother's handwriting on the back. Evan, age 7. His face. I clench my jaw, the memory cutting deeper than it should. The phone vibrates once more, a final message. From Mom. "Please. We don't know who else to turn to." My heart stutters. I know I should delete it, block them, forget them. But something about those words feels unfinished. Like a door I thought I'd locked that's creaking open again. I exhale shakily, pressing my palm flat against the cold surface of the kitchen counter. I tell myself it's nothing, just my imagination. But the chill in my gut says otherwise. And I can't pretend it doesn't matter. I don't remember the exact moment when the feeling started. Maybe it was in the way my mother's voice faltered on the phone, or how my father cleared his throat before speaking as if rehearsing something. I tried to ignore it at first, to chalk it up to the old friction between us. But the longer the calls went on, the more I couldn't deny that something didn't add up. It began as tiny inconsistencies. My mother would say they were fine, but her tone had a thinness to it, brittle and forced, like a cheap mask that could crack under pressure. My father, usually stoic to the point of cruelty, sounded unsettled. He tried to camouflage it behind casual questions about my work, but the curiosity came out too sudden, too intrusive. They hadn't asked about my business in years. Now they wanted to know everything. How many clients I had. How big the contracts were. How much I was earning. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, hearing their voices replay in my mind. I could almost see their faces, the way my father's jaw tightened when he was about to say something he knew I wouldn't like. The way my mother avoided eye contact when she was hiding something. Those small betrayals of expression haunted me. And then there were the silences, long, awkward gaps in the conversation when I said something they didn't expect. If I joked about finally proving them wrong, they didn't laugh. If I reminded them how they'd called me a fool for chasing my dream, they responded with evasive murmurs. It was as if they were trying to pretend they'd always supported me, and the harder they tried, the more obvious the lie became. One afternoon, as I sat in my office, a cramped space with a view of the neighboring brick wall, I replayed our last call in my head. My mother had asked, "So, you're doing well then?" But her voice trembled like she was afraid of the answer. When I said yes, her sigh had been too long, too weighted. It wasn't relief. It was resignation. I swiveled in my chair, tapping a pencil against my knee, thinking about the years I'd spent proving them wrong. How I'd left home with nothing but a duffel bag and my laptop. How they'd said I'd be back within a year, begging for help. The shame I'd carried was like a stone in my chest, and some part of me still carried it even now, even after I'd succeeded beyond anything they'd ever imagined. But there was something else in that shame now, something that made the stone heavier, colder. Suspicion. I decided to test the waters. The next time my mother called, I answered with casual warmth, feigning ignorance. "Hey, Mom. How are things back home?" I asked, trying to sound breezy. The line was silent for too long. My father's voice came next, measured and too polite. "Everything's fine. How's business?" He stressed that last word like it was the real reason he'd called. I took a breath. "Growing," I said. "I signed 2 new contracts last month." Another pause. I could almost hear them calculating. My mother jumped in, her voice higher than usual. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Sweetheart. She hadn't called me that since I was 12. Something tightened in my throat. Is everything okay with you too? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. My father grunted. Why wouldn't it be? But he didn't sound convincing. It was as if they were holding their collective breath, waiting for me to offer something. Money, perhaps. The thought made my stomach churn. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring into the darkness, thinking about the last time I'd seen them. My father's disdain, my mother's quiet disappointment. They'd stood in the doorway as I loaded my car, certain I'd fail. My father had said, "Don't come running back when you're broke." My mother had cried, but she hadn't stopped him. The memory made my chest ache in a way that was both familiar and alien. Familiar because it was the same ache I'd carried for years. Alien because now, I wasn't the failure they'd predicted. I was the success they pretended not to see. And it made me wonder, were they ashamed, regretful, or just desperate? In the morning, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I called my brother. Michael still lived close to them, still entrenched in the small town I'd escaped. We hadn't spoken much since I left. He'd inherited the role of the golden child, the obedient son who did everything they asked. But maybe he'd tell me the truth. When he answered, his voice was wary. "Hey," he said, cautious, as if he wasn't sure why I was calling. I forced a smile he couldn't see. "Hey, Mike. How are Mom and Dad?" Another pause. "They're fine," he said, but the hesitation told me everything. I pressed harder. "Come on. I know something's going on. Just tell me." He exhaled a long, tired breath. "It's not my place," he muttered. A cold chill crept up my spine. "Not your place to tell me what?" I demanded, my voice rising despite myself. Michael sighed again. "Look, it's complicated. They'll talk to you when they're ready." My skin prickled. "So there is something," I said, my heart thumping in my throat. He didn't deny it. "They're proud of you, you know," he said softly. The words were like a slap. "They have a funny way of showing it," I whispered. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, the morning light slanting across the counter. My coffee had gone cold. I felt a deep, hollow ache in my chest, a mix of old wounds and fresh uncertainty. What were they hiding? And why did it feel like some part of me still needed their approval, even after everything? Over the next few days, the pattern became impossible to ignore. My parents called more often, sometimes just to check in, sometimes to reminisce about the past. They would drop little comments about the economy, the rising cost of living, how some people were struggling to make ends meet. My father's tone was bitter, almost envious, when he mentioned neighbors whose kids were helping them out. My mother's voice quivered whenever she talked about the house, the same house where I'd grown up, where I'd first learned what it felt like to be small and inadequate. I knew they were building up to something. I could feel it in every forced laugh, every stilted conversation. It was like watching a play where everyone forgot their lines, the tension thick enough to taste. And all the while, the old doubts clawed at the edges of my mind. What if they were right about me all along? What if I was still that desperate kid, craving their validation? One evening, after another uneasy call, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My face looked drawn, older somehow. I pressed my palms to the sink and whispered, "You don't owe them anything." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. The next day, I got a letter in the mail. It was from my father, in his stiff, careful handwriting. My stomach turned as I read the first line. "We need to talk." My eyes skimmed the rest, references to difficult times, hints about options, and finally, a single sentence that made my vision blur. "We're proud of you, and we hope you might consider helping us." I sat down hard in the nearest chair. My hands were trembling. For a moment, I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. All I could hear was my father's voice the day I left. "You'll never make it." The words had been carved into me like scars. And now he was asking for my help. The betrayal felt layered, too complex to name. Part of me wanted to tear the letter to shreds. Part of me wanted to call and scream. And a small, treacherous part of me felt satisfied, vindicated. I had made it. I was the success story they dismissed. and now they needed me more than I had ever needed them. But the satisfaction was hollow. It didn't erase the years of silence, the nights I'd wondered if they were right. It didn't change the past. Nothing ever would. As I folded the letter and set it aside, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was the moment everything shifted. The proof I wasn't imagining things. The confirmation that all the tension, all the suspicion, had been real. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. Something was happening, and it was only just beginning. I wish I could say I was surprised when the truth finally clawed its way into the open, but the truth is, I had been expecting something like this all along. Maybe it was the way my father's voice broke in that last phone call, or the tremor in my mother's careful sentences. Maybe it was the sheer desperation that seeps into a person's tone when the world has begun to collapse around them. I sat in my small kitchen, the one I had worked years to afford, staring at the folder they'd couriered to me after days of unanswered messages. The envelope was thick, weighed down with shame and paperwork. I touched it like it might burn me. A part of me wanted to toss it into the trash unopened, to let them reap whatever consequence waited on the other side of those creased papers. But another part, the part of me that still remembered sitting alone in my childhood bedroom, telling myself that someday I'd be more than their disappointment, needed to see exactly how far they'd fallen. I tore it open with unsteady hands. Inside was a mess of bank statements, final notices, and a handwritten letter. The numbers told a story of debt climbing like ivy over every aspect of their lives. Mortgage payments years behind, credit cards maxed and defaulted, personal loans stacked one over another like a house of brittle cards. It was all there, spelled out in black and white. For a few long minutes, I couldn't move. My heartbeat was a dull drum in my ears, pounding out the old chorus I'd heard all my life. You'll never make it. You're not practical. Dreams don't pay bills. Do you think you're better than everyone else? You'll come crawling back when you fail. Yet here we were, only it wasn't me who was crawling. I picked up the letter. My mother's familiar script, the loops of her vowels I used to trace on birthday cards, filled every line. I know you must hate us. We said terrible things, and for that I am sorry. Your father and I, we were scared. Scared of losing you. Scared that you would end up like us, disappointed and small. It doesn't excuse how we treated you, but maybe it explains something. We need your help now. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't urgent. I let the paper fall onto the table. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes until sparks of white bloomed behind my eyelids. I didn't want to cry for them anymore. I didn't want to feel anything. But the tears came anyway, hot and humiliating. All the memories tangled around me in suffocating strands. My father standing over me at the kitchen table the night before I left home, voice low and poisonous. You think you're going to be some big shot? You're going to fail. And when you do, don't expect this family to catch you. I had believed him for longer than I ever admitted. Even when the paycheck started coming, when my business finally took off, some corner of my mind still whispered that it was all temporary, that he would be proven right in the end. I stood up, pacing the length of the kitchen, my bare feet cold on the tile. The fluorescent light flickered overhead, making everything look washed out and unreal. I felt like I was watching someone else's life. I picked up my phone, thumb hovering over my father's number. My heart rebelled at the thought of hearing his voice again, of subjecting myself to more of the same condescension now papered over with a sheen of regret. I set the phone back down. Instead, I called Alex, my oldest friend, the one person who'd seen me through the worst of it. He picked up on the second ring.
Hey.
You okay? You sound off. I tried to laugh, but it cracked on the way out. You'll never guess who just asked me for help. There was a pause. Your parents. I sat heavily back in my chair. How did you know? Because I knew this day would come. You've been working your ass off for years, and they've been pretending it doesn't matter. Sooner or later, reality catches up. His words were meant to be comforting, but they only made the ache in my chest sharper. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice so small it didn't sound like me. Do you want to help them? I don't know. My gaze fell to the pile of papers again. Part of me wants to. Part of me, wants to watch them drown in their own arrogance. That's human, Alex said gently. But don't do anything out of spite. Do it because you choose to, not because you feel you have to prove anything. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. They don't deserve it. No, he agreed. But maybe you do. The words landed like a stone in my stomach. Maybe I did deserve the closure, the final proof that I had not only survived their scorn but surpassed it in every way. After we hung up, I sat for a long time in the quiet. My thoughts circled like vultures over the same question. What did helping them mean for me? Was it compassion, or was it surrender? When the sun started bleeding through the blinds, I finally stood and gathered the documents back into the envelope. I couldn't make a decision yet, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I was no longer the child begging for scraps of approval. I was the one holding the lifeline. And they knew it. That thought should have made me feel triumphant. Instead, it filled me with something darker, something I couldn't name. Later that afternoon, I drove to the house I hadn't seen in over a decade. The paint was peeling, the yard overgrown. It looked smaller than I remembered, as if all the menace had drained out with the years. My mother opened the door before I knocked. She looked older, diminished. Her eyes swept over me like she couldn't quite believe I was real. "You came," she whispered. I stared at her, searching for some sign that she understood the enormity of this moment. All I saw was desperation. Inside, my father sat in the same armchair where he'd delivered so many of his pronouncements. He didn't stand. "So," he said, voice hoarse, "you've done well for yourself." The understatement made me want to laugh. Instead, I nodded. "I have." For a moment, none of us spoke. The air was heavy with everything unspoken, years of resentment, regret, and brittle pride. I thought about the folder in my car, about the accounts that could be settled with a single transfer. I thought about the child I'd been, sitting in this very room, convinced I was worthless. I met my father's gaze, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what I saw there. "I know why you called me," I said quietly. "But you need to understand something. You don't get to decide what happens next." My mother swallowed, her hands twisting together. "We're sorry." The words were so inadequate, they were almost laughable. But they were all she had. I let the silence stretch, let them feel the uncertainty I'd lived with my whole life. Then I turned and walked back to the door. I didn't say yes or no. Not yet. Outside, the sun was setting behind the roofline, turning the sky a vivid orange. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cold evening air, feeling something shift deep inside me. I wasn't sure what I would do, but for the first time, the choice was entirely mine. And that was a power I had waited my whole life to claim. I finally agreed to meet them in person. The invitation came through a hesitant voicemail from my mother, her voice uncharacteristically small, as if she were bracing for an impact she couldn't avoid. I chose the time and place deliberately, a cafe halfway between my apartment and the old family home, a neutral zone where neither of us could claim the upper hand. As I walked in, I spotted them immediately. My father's shoulders were slumped in a way I had never seen. My mother kept twisting a cloth napkin in her lap, as though her life depended on its unraveling. I took my seat slowly, aware of how surreal it felt to have them look at me like this, with something resembling fear in their eyes. "Thank you for coming," my mother said. The words sounded rehearsed, hollow. I didn't respond right away. I studied them, noting the cracks in their composure, the lines etched into their faces. Time had been merciless to all of us. My father cleared his throat. "We thought it was time we talked." "About what?" My voice was colder than I intended, but I didn't soften it. "About everything," he said. "About how we treated you. About what we need now." There it was. The admission, the confession. But it wasn't contrition I heard. It was desperation. "You mean how you ridiculed everything I ever tried to do?" I asked, the words cutting sharper than I expected. "How you told me I'd never make it, that I was pathetic to think I could do better than you." They flinched, a synchronized recoil that almost satisfied me. My mother looked up, her eyes glistening. We thought we were protecting you from disappointment. We thought you'd end up crushed by your own ambition." "No," I said. "You thought I'd fail. You wanted me to. Because if I succeeded, it would prove how small your dreams were." My father's jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "Fair." I leaned forward, feeling the heat in my cheeks. "You told me to my face that I was worthless, that my ideas were childish. You wanted me to crawl back and admit you were right." "We were wrong," my mother whispered. Her voice cracked. You were right to believe in yourself." I almost laughed. If she expected absolution, she would have to wait. "Now you want my help," I said. "Now that you've burned every bridge and have nowhere else to turn." She looked at my father, then back at me. "We are in a difficult situation. The bank, the house." "I know," I interrupted. "I know everything. The debts, the foreclosure notice, the lawsuits, all of it." My father's eyes widened, and for a moment I saw something like panic flicker across his face. "You've been checking up on us?" "No," I said. "I was informed. People talk." He looked away. My mother's hands trembled. The napkin she'd been twisting was in shreds. "So what is this?" I asked. "A performance? You think if you show enough remorse, I'll write you a check and pretend the past didn't happen?" "No." My mother's voice rose, brittle and sharp. "We're not here to manipulate you. We're here because we have no one else. We thought that I'd feel guilty enough to save you," I finished. Her lip quivered. My father finally met my eyes. "We know we failed you, but we're still your parents." I felt something inside me buckle, a part of me that still wanted to believe those words meant something. But another part, harder and older, refused to yield. "And if I had failed," I asked, "if I'd listened to you and given up, would you be here apologizing? Or would you be telling me you were right all along?" Silence. I pressed my advantage. "When I was 17, you told me I was embarrassing, that no one would ever respect me, that I'd come crawling back. Well, here you are." My father's mouth opened, then closed. My mother covered her face with her hands. "You have no idea what it was like," she whispered. "We were scared. We didn't know how to help you. Your dreams sounded impossible." "They were," I said, "until I made them real." A long, suffocating silence fell between us. The other diners seemed to blur into the background. For a moment, I almost pitied them, two aging people whose pride had finally collapsed under the weight of their own contempt. "You've made your point," my father said at last. His voice was low, hollow. "We were wrong. You proved it. Is that what you needed to hear?" "No," I said. "I needed to hear the truth." He swallowed hard. "The truth is we were afraid you'd leave us behind. And you did." I felt a hollow ache in my chest, but I didn't let it show. My mother lowered her hands, eyes red and swollen. "Please," she whispered. "We have nothing left. We need you." For a moment, I imagined how satisfying it would be to stand, to walk away without a word, to let them drown in the consequences of their cruelty. But something stopped me, a memory of the child I used to be, starving for any scrap of approval. I didn't owe them anything, and yet the choice was still mine. I took a slow breath. "You're right," I said quietly. "You have nothing left, and that's not my fault." My father closed his eyes, as if bracing for a verdict he already knew. "But I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet," I added. "I'll be in touch." I rose from the table. For once, neither of them tried to stop me. As I stepped outside, the summer air felt sharper somehow, charged with something I couldn't name. The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded like the end of something. Or maybe the beginning. The house was quiet now, too quiet. The confrontation was over, but the echoes still screamed in my ears. My parents' voices, once filled with judgment and cold disapproval, had shifted into a desperate plea, heavy with the weight of years they pretended didn't happen. I stood in my apartment, staring at the envelope they left behind. Inside, a torn bank notice confirmed everything, They were bankrupt. Their house was weeks from foreclosure. The irony was suffocating. The same house I was never welcome in, the same halls where I was called a failure, unworthy, a disgrace, was now crumbling like their pride. I placed the envelope on the table and sat on the edge of my couch, not leaning back, just suspended. Half in memory, half in disbelief. They used to laugh when I said I wanted to create art. My father would scoff, "You can't eat dreams," and my mother would ask neighbors for job leads behind my back. I remembered those dinner table interrogations. The side glances. The heavy silences when I talked about my ideas. They never said it outright, but I wasn't one of them. Not smart like my sister. Not responsible like my brother. I was the drifter. But now, I was the one with choices. And they had none. The fallout wasn't explosive. It was slow, creeping, like an infection spreading under skin. I started avoiding their calls again, like I used to when I was younger, except this time, it wasn't fear holding me back. It was clarity. They called me daily now. Sometimes twice. Always my mother first. Then my father. Sometimes just silence. No voicemail, no words. Just the empty space they never let me fill when I was trying to belong. But I didn't block them. Instead, I listened to every voicemail. Sometimes at night, while sipping whiskey and staring at the city lights. Their voices cracked now, softer, raw, apologetic, as if saying, "I'm sorry," could glue together the fractured porcelain of our past. "I know we were hard on you," my mother said in one recording. "But it was only because we were scared. We didn't know how to understand you." That line stayed with me. We didn't know how to understand you. It wasn't just an excuse. It was the entire truth of my childhood. They didn't understand me. So they rejected me. In therapy, I had called it emotional starvation. The feeling of growing up surrounded by people who were biologically obligated to love me, but made no effort to know me. That kind of neglect cuts deeper than overt abuse. It makes you question whether your existence has any right to joy at all. And now, the power had shifted. I could send the money with a click. I had more than enough. But every time my finger hovered over the screen, I froze. Not out of pettiness. Not even revenge. But because a new question haunted me now. If I help them, am I betraying the child they broke? The silence between us became a language. They learned to leave longer pauses in their voicemails, hoping I'd say something, anything. But I stayed silent too. Then one evening a letter came. Not an email. Not a text. A real, handwritten letter in my mother's careful, slanted script. Pages of it. Ink smudged where the paper had absorbed her tears. She wrote about things I never knew. That my father's business had failed 3 years ago. That they'd sold jewelry, furniture, even borrowed from my cousins just to stay afloat. That they didn't want me to see them like this. Vulnerable, humbled. But then came the final page. The one that broke me in half. "I used to keep a scrapbook of your childhood art. You thought I threw it out. I didn't. It's in my closet. Still there. I used to take it out when your father wasn't home and cry. Because I saw something in you I was too afraid to protect. I let him convince me that tough love was safer than belief. And now I don't even know who I am anymore." I reread that line over and over. I let him convince me that tough love was safer than belief. I cried. For her. For me. For everything we lost trying to live up to roles we didn't choose. Days passed. Then weeks. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Not because I hated her, but because the wound had grown so deep that I was scared healing would hurt more than the scar. But that changed when I visited the old neighborhood again. Not intentionally, I was meeting a client nearby. But I saw the "for sale" sign in front of their house, the same one where I spent years locked in silence. The lawn was yellowed. The mailbox broken. I walked to the front steps. My father was sitting on the porch, thinner, smaller. He looked up and blinked like he couldn't believe I was real. He didn't speak at first. Just stared. Then finally, "I was wrong." That's all he said. Not a speech. Not a plea. Just a sentence that had waited decades to be born. I sat beside him. No hug. No warmth. but something else, a strange kind of peace. He looked ahead, eyes glassy. Your mom, she's sick. Nothing terminal. But it's been hard. We didn't know who else to ask. I nodded. Not in agreement, just in acknowledgement. I didn't promise anything. I didn't say I'd fix it. But I didn't leave either. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. What do you owe the people who created your body but abandoned your soul? Forgiveness isn't a switch. It's a slow crawl toward light. I sent money the next morning. Not much. Just enough to cover medication and bills. With no note. No name. They'd know it was me. It wasn't about being the hero. It was about reclaiming control. 2 weeks later, I got a final letter.
Short.
From my mother. You don't have to love us again. We'll never deserve that. But thank you for not letting us drown. You became more than we could ever dream. And I'm sorry we were too small to believe in big dreams. I folded the letter, placed it in a box with old sketchbooks, old rejection letters, and the bank notice they left. A time capsule of who I used to be and how far I had come. One rainy evening, I returned to the childhood home one last time before it was sold. It was empty now. Furniture gone. Walls blank. But in the corner closet, just as she promised, I found it. A box. Inside were my old drawings. Pages of wild colors and impossible dreams. And on each page, her handwriting. He sees things we can't. This one's full of fire. Maybe he'll become someone none of us understand. I wept, because for the first time in my life, I realized they were afraid of what I had the courage to see. As I closed the closet door and turned to leave, something caught my attention.
A sound.
I paused. Not footsteps. Not voices. Just a whisper of memory. The kind that wraps around you like a ghost. And then, a feeling.
Eyes.
Watching. I stepped outside. Looked back at the house. Not with anger. Not with pride. But with quiet power. Final sentence. I didn't need their love to become who I am, but maybe, just maybe, they needed my strength to remember who they were.